Hi, everyone. Welcome. In case you're wondering why we began today's program playing Prince's iconic song, Raspberry Beret, it's because our special guest today, Dr. Susan Rogers, was the music producer, the engineer for the sound engineer for Prince during his very productive peak between 1983 and 1987. So we thought we'd give you what Susan Rogers refers to as a mental treat, listening to his iconic song. So welcome to The Open Mind. It is a lecture and film series that brings together thought leaders in science and culture for meaningful and relevant discussions about mental health issues. Proudly sponsored by UCLA's Friends of the Semel Institute for Neuroscience and Human Behavior and the Resnick Neuropsychiatric Hospital Board of Advisors. I'm Vicki Goodman, and it is my honor to welcome today's featured speaker, Dr. Susan Rogers, who's the author of This Is What It Sounds Like, What the Music You Love Says About You. Susan is a cognitive neuroscientist, professor at the Berklee College of Music, as well as a platinum record producer. And as I mentioned, she was the sound engineer for Prince. She is the first woman to receive the Music Producers Guild Outstanding Contribution to UK Music Award. She is joining us today from her home in Cairo, New York, which very appropriately for this presentation is located very near Woodstock for all you music fans of that era. We're also honored to welcome back to the Open Mind, Dr. Jude Tramo, professor in the neuroscience program and the Department of Integrative Biology and Physiology at UCLA College, the neurology department at the David Geffen School of Medicine at UCLA, and the musicology department at the Herb Alpert School of Music. Dr. Tramo has been conducting original research on the functional neuroanatomy and neurophysiology of music perception and cognition for over 25 years. He has received numerous awards for research and patient care, including a Grammy Foundation Research Award, a Performing Arts Medicine Award, and recognition for Best Doctors in America. Before coming to UCLA, Dr. Tramo taught at Harvard University and served on the steering committee of the Mind, Brain, and Behavior Interfaculty Initiative. A few housekeeping notes before we get started. Today's program is being recorded and will be available for viewing on our YouTube channel, which you can find on our newly designed website, friendsofthesemelinstitute.org. There you will also find a library of videos from past Open Mind programs, a calendar of upcoming events, information about the Friends Scholar Program and our endowed term chair, and about our virtual Open Mind Film Festival for high school students that will be held on Sunday, April 30th. Deadline for submissions is March 22nd, so high school students, time to get going. And WOW 2023, the Mental Health Summit on May 4th at Royce Hall, that the Friends jointly sponsor with the Resnick Board. And our special guest will be Oprah Winfrey, hosted by Lisa Kudrow, with a special performance by Grammy and Oscar winner Jon Batiste. This is our only ticketed event of the year, and proceeds will benefit mental health education, research, and patient care at UCLA. So the last segment of today's program is reserved for your questions. If you would like to ask a question of either of our speakers, please type it into the Q&A, which is located at the bottom of your Zoom screen. We have nearly 1,700 people that registered for today's program, so we will do our very best to get to as many questions as possible and appreciate your patience. And now please join me in giving a warm Zoom welcome to Dr. Susan Rogers and Dr. Jude Tramo. Thank you so much.
Hi, everybody. Because of Zoom, I'm now in the habit of waving at the television.
Susan, hey, everybody out there.
Hey, thank you all for coming. We've got so much to talk about because we're going to be talking about something we all love. We all love very much. But we all have an intensely personal relationship with it. I have to say, you may see me make a lunge for my tea or a Kleenex. I just came home from a long trip and I picked up a cold, but I think I'll be okay. So first I'll talk a little bit about the book. It's called This Is What It Sounds Like, What the Music You Love Says About You. I worked in music for 22 years as a recording engineer, a record producer, a mixer. I had #1 singles in all of those roles. It was kind of exciting to be one of very, very, very few women in those roles, but I did all right. I had a successful career and I worked with a lot of great artists. But I had a big hit record with BarenakedLadies in the late 90s. And with that money, before we, streamed music, when we actually went to the store and bought it, with that royalty money, I was able to enter college as a freshman, do 8 straight years, and earn my PhD at McGill University, specializing in music perception and cognition. Being a huge fan of Dr. Tramo's work, he inspired me greatly for my doctoral thesis, so I'm thrilled to be here with him. I was approached by a co-author named Ogi Ogas, who co-writes nonfiction books with scientists. And he said, how would you like to write a book about music? And I said, well, I can't do that because I'm a non-musician. What I can write about is music listening. I have been a professional listener all my life. And that sounds kind of funny to say, but in order to be the one who's on input in the recording studio, you hone your capacity to receive that signal, to listen to those performances, to those musical elements, to those gestures, to those sounds, to that style. You hone that ear, and your job is to return back to the performers what it sounds like to you. So Ogi invited me to write this book, and in the writing of it, I was compiling all the things that I learned in grad school and in the recording studio, and I realized there's a model in here of music perception and cognition. So I got brave, I put it out there. I say brave because I learned from some great scientists, but scientists are a tough crowd. But all these things are things I learned in college. So this model of music perception is describing our listener profile. You can think of your listener profile, I like to picture it this way, as 7 stars out there in the vastness of space. One represents rhythm, melody is another, lyrics is another, timbre, sound design is another, art and beauty are the other 3. When a given record plops down somewhere in the vicinity of your ears, of your constellation, if it plops down kind of in the middle, you'll say, yeah, that's good, I like it, it's fine. But if it just so happens to plop down right near your melody star, right near your rhythm star, you're gonna feel the gravitational pull of that star. And you're gonna feel like, this is the music of me. This is the groove I like. This is the style I like. This is the vocal timbre that I like, the singing that I like, the arrangement that I like. Because cosmology tells us that when we look at a pattern of stars, we're looking at it from Earth. You can only really tell what's going on with it if you view it from all possible angles. It's the same thing with our musical profile. We know what it is, we know what we love, but I was hoping with this book to help listeners find some language to describe their listener profile to other listeners and be able to say, here's why I like what I like. This is the music of me. That was the goal.
Susan, you talk about the 7 cardinal points of reference in relation to these stars and the universe of music. And it appears that some of them are very much related to the music itself and come from the music. What I found fascinating, and especially given your experience as a producer and an engineer, is that 3 of them, which you refer to as art and beauty, really connect the listener very closely with those perceptual features of melody, lyrics, rhythm, and timbre. And that's what you call authenticity, realism, and novelty. So can you talk a bit about those, what I would consider to be, including from the cognitive neuroscience perspective, somewhat transcendental features, experiences that we have with the music that really draw on our past and maybe how we see our future, as opposed to the present of the actual sound?
Yeah, it's interesting. So the three aesthetic dimensions, as you mentioned, apply not just to music, but to all art, dance, painting, cinema. Authenticity refers to your subjective impression of how genuine and sincere those performance gestures are. So a person can be on the microphone singing their heart out, and yet we human beings are pretty clever. We may not recognize why, but we can pick up on subtle little cues that cause us to think she's not feeling it. She's not into it. We pick up on those very small acoustic cues that give us a hint as to what the person is feeling when they play a saxophone or they play drums or they sing. So that's authenticity. I personally have a sweet spot that prefers a little bit of sloppiness. I like the wrong note played with gusto way more than the right note played timidly. My co-author, he wants technical perfection. Don't you dare hit a wrong note. It better be technically perfect. I'm okay with imperfection because I'm listening for my sweet spot in authenticity, that rawness. Abstraction versus realism refers to the records that we made in the prior century that I made and records we make today. So when we made records back in the analog tape days, the maestros of recording were maestros of capturing reality, just like painters were in the 19th century. They captured reality. You pushed paint around on canvas so that it looked like hair and skin and cloth and wood and all different kinds of surfaces with one medium. We moved microphones around in the studio so that the listener could have the fantasy of imagining they're right there in that studio, right in front of that band, or even better, maybe you're playing and singing the music yourself. That's a realistic record. My sweet spot is over there. The youth of today are making a lot of music that is made, as we say, in the box. It's made with samples, and they're using sound design and audio chimeras. And the sounds they're presenting to us musically often represent instruments with no physical correlate. It doesn't exist. Some research that my co-author and I did said that, yeah, some people, when they listen to music, love to have the visual fantasy of seeing other worlds, of going into that abstract place in their minds where they're making up their own scenario of what this music represents. That's their sweet spot. Others of us like that, those realistic records. Then the third dimension, of course, is familiar to everyone, novelty and familiarity. Some of us like boundary pushing art, and others of us, we're listening for, yeah, don't mess up my form. Give me my classic rock, give me my classic folk, give me my classic gospel. Just do it to perfection. We know how this form goes. Show me how well it can be done. Like watching a sporting event. We all have our sweet spot there. Personally, I like a little bit more novelty than what you'd find on the pop charts. My brothers, who are all around my age, they like a little bit more familiarity.
When you contrast realism with abstraction, it brings to, and what the actual production of music involves, you brought to mind the notion of embodiment, and that when you play a musical instrument and even just sing, there's this connection of your body with the music, and in the abstract, you have the freedom of not being necessarily bound by it, and at the same time lose the kinesthetic aspects that the embodiment brings. And rhythm is one of those key features that you mentioned and that we know is universal in musics around the world. Can you tell us a little bit about how we synchronize our movements to music. What's happening with rhythm there? How is it that, we move to the music? What's this connection between music and movement?
Oh, it's so cool. So human beings don't have eyes in the back of their heads. So we needed some sense that told us what was going on behind us. This is why sound is actually, it might surprise you to learn, the fastest of our five senses. It won't surprise you to learn, but it might surprise the audience. Sound audio is the fastest of our five senses. We evolved these thick neural tracks between our auditory processing region and our motor muscle region so that in the event that we hear something funny going on behind us, we can tell our muscles, get out of the way, get up the tree, get down into the ditch, get out of the way, move. So there's very strong connections between sound and movement. When we listen to music, it takes a little bit of time to process the melody because pitches are heard in relation to the pitches that came before. We have to hear, where's this melody going? Where's it going to go in the chorus? We have to hear it over time before we can truly appreciate it. And same is true with lyrics. We have to hear, what's this story about, so that I can place these words in context. But rhythm, a bar, 2 bars, we're there. We can process rhythm really quickly. Pardon me. And it feels good to synchronize our body movements to an external source. Most of the music that we love is in 4/4 time because we've got 2 arms and 2 legs. The music that we tend to love the best is right around between 100 and 120 beats per minute. It feels good to move to the work of Ani Patel and others has shown how listening to the rhythm is really effective at increasing oscillations in something called the beta band. The beta band just refers to a whole body sort of neural oscillation in a band of frequencies between 15 and 30 hertz. It's a little bit more pumped up than that calm alpha state. It's a little bit calmer, that really hyper gamma state. That's that feel good zone. So music, you listen to radio in the morning, music can get you up and awake and moving, and it can calm you down. If you've just had a stressful time, you need to unwind before bed, gets you in that sweet beta zone. It feels good to synchronize with others. It makes us feel connected to others.
And there's been a fair amount of work on treating movement disorders like Parkinson's disease using music to make some utility out of this phenomenon and this link between music and movement that, as you know, Michael Tout and others have incorporated with rhythmic auditory stimulation and the basal ganglia. So when we listen to these songs that we love, and I have to just say at a personal level, as a music lover, thank you for the great sounds. Really, that there's a particular sound to that era of Prince that is, in some sense, a fingerprint. And I think those of us who've been involved in music know how important the engineer and the producer are to what we as fans actually experience. We identify it with the artist, but the actual product, like when we were listening to Raspberry Beret, really is through the auditory. I like to think of it as auditory cortex and the rest of the cerebral cortex of the engineer and the producer in actually making the sound. So thank you for that, Susan. Now, you mentioned in the book, it brought to mind the Greek Satyr, or Debussy's Prelude to the Afternoon of a Faun, or even Lucy, Australopithecus Lucy, where, like a satyr is a goat from the waist down and a man from the waist up. And, Lucy, who's, 3.2 million years old, is sort of like, a human from the waist down and an ape from the waist up. And you make a distinction and mention this decades-old Beatles versus Stones competition that you can, as a first level of approximation, dichotomize music in music that's above the neck and music that's below the neck. So can you please tell all of us what you mean by music that's above the neck versus below the neck?
Thank you. So of all the dimensions described in the book, all of it came from things I learned from great music researchers at McGill University and also University of Minnesota. But that above the neck versus below the neck authenticity is where I drew most heavily on my experiences in the recording studio. So we sometimes say that, well, we might say that rhythm is a record's hips, melody is a record's heart because of how easily it evokes our emotions. Lyrics are a record's thoughts, the ideas expressed by the singer. And timbre is a record's face because it's the various sounds that we hear on a record. So we tend to like our gestures in this area to come from a place that feels just right for us. When a singer is, as I mentioned earlier, singing her heart out, it sounds to me like her gestures are coming from her heart, from the hips. And my favorite musician of all time is the late, great jazz pianist Bud Powell, because it sounds to me, when I hear him play, that his music performance goes from his heart to his fingertips and it bypasses his head completely. He makes mistakes and he's sloppy, but it feels like that's music coming from lower part of his body. Now, when I listen to Ella Fitzgerald, the goddess, the maestra of technique, Ella is clearly coming from the neck up. So music made from the neck up doesn't mean that it doesn't have soul. It just means that Ella's soul is so deep that she can, and Frank Sinatra was another one, she can infuse her performance with technical perfection and still give us the thrill of authenticity in that performance. Not easily done. One of the early mistakes that conservatory students like the folks at Berkeley will make is they get all this formal training and they assume that what they need to do is go into the recording studio and play every note on pitch and on time, and that will be a perfect performance. And they're so wrong about that. You get to that point where now you have the technical proficiency to push paint around on canvas, to push sounds around on your instrument. Now you have to work your way back to the naive impulse, saying something. You have to play music the way a 3-year-old would if they could. What kind of music would a 3-year-old make, or a 97-year-old would do if they could? Express all life. As we say, music is an expression of life, and life is still not perfect. It's imperfect, and it's robust, and it's fragile, and it's complex, and it's simple. Our performance gestures need to express all of life, not just technical perfection.
So when all of the stars get aligned and we experience this emotional, physical, visceral, and intellectual experience of music as listeners and lovers of music, what's going on in the brain when all of that happens?
So fabulous. I love this. Robin Wilkins and her team at Wake Forest University looked at this. So she had people bring into the laboratory music that they liked very much, and music that they disliked, because she wanted to find out what's going on in their brains when they listen to these two categories of music. And of course, categories are driven by a praxis. They don't exist in nature. Good music, bad music. It's up to you. You decided that there's a psychological boundary between these two things, and one's on one side and one's on the other. So she had people lying in the fMRI scanner and she was watching brain activity. When they listened to music that they liked, circuits in the brain involved in self-image, self-consciousness, self-awareness lit up. In other words, people went into their own heads. I think we've all had that experience. When you're hearing something that you like, you're going inward. You're kind of tuning out the outside world a little bit because you're savoring those treats that you're finding, whether that treat is in the lyrics or the melody, the performance or the style. You found your treats, you know where your treats are in this record, and you're savoring that, and you're feeling as though it's speaking to you personally. Those are the circuits that lit up. But what was delightful and interesting is what Robin saw when people were listening to music they disliked. There's a wee little circuit in the back of the brain. There's two of them. Usually the brain has two of most everything, but it's the back right-hand side, precuneus. And that little thing is not involved necessarily in self-image, but it connects to those circuits. And when the precuneus heard music it disliked, it basically said, not for me, do not want. And it decreased its connections to the self neurons. And as Robin wrote, it became connected primarily only to itself, which is so damn funny to me. It's so damn funny that there's a circuit in our brains that's deciding for us, hate it or love it. And when it hates it, it's saying, no, do not want, get this away from me. This is not representative of me. So the natural follow-up question is, can you learn to like music that initially you don't like? Yeah. And Mark, I would like to see this researched because I don't think it's been researched, but my hunch is that to learn to like music that you don't like, you gotta release some dopamine. You gotta feel love. You gotta feel some euphoria. My students did it to me when I first came to Berkeley, and they turned me on to American hardcore. It's like art music, punk, heavy metal. And we formed a little triangle. So the kids are playing these records and they're pointing out, here's what to listen for. Here's what's great about it. Check this out. This is the good part. Oh, it's coming up. Oh, this is great. So there's a connection between these kids and this music. They love it. They love the music. I love them because they're so kind to share this with teacher. And in that triangle, I formed that warm feeling of love for this music. The third line of the triangle got connected. And now I love that music. Make no mistake, it's not my go-to music. There'd probably be something wrong with me if it were, but I listen to it now and my precuneus does not reject it. I like it. I remember those kids and I remember that love and the shows they took me to, and we can learn to like new styles of music.
This cliche that music is the universal language. Can you elaborate on modern ways of thinking about music and language, and whether that cliche actually is truthful?
Yeah, I'm skeptical about that. Here's why. The New Grove Dictionary of Music said that pop, rock, soul music, as it appeared in the United States and the UK in the 50s and 60s, has become the lingua franca of the music world, because you hear our modern music in all corners of the globe. But there's a huge cultural component to the music that we like and to what music says to us, how it speaks to us. Fun fact, little children are actually rather suspicious of a new kid at school who listens to a different style of music than they do. Kid comes over from another country and you say, oh, what are you into? Kid plays something, it sounds foreign to students and they think, oh, you're not part of my clan, my tribe, my troop. Music is getting a wee bit homogenous, but not homogenous to the point of there being no cultural difference between different countries. One of the things that always stuck with me that I learned in grad school is participants from Canada and Iran were asked to listen to native North American Western music and Persian music from Iran and instrumental music and identify the emotion being expressed by it. And they were only accurate with the basic emotions of happiness and sadness. Sad music sounds sad and happiness sounds happy, but there was still some confusion there. Happiness and anger are both expressed by a fast tempo, very staccato performance gesture. Da, 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 da. That can be happy as hell, or it can be angry. And you needed to know the cultural norms of the music in your culture to correctly identify, oh, this is saying happiness and this is saying anger. And the same thing with sadness and peacefulness. You may have heard the story of the great Samuel Barber, who wrote adagios the Adagio for Strings by Samuel Barber. It's been called the saddest piece of music ever written. It was used in the movie Platoon. And poor Samuel Barber, apparently he thought, I thought it was peaceful. What are you talking about? And they told him he just written the saddest piece of music ever made. So it's not necessarily universal.
And what is it about teens and music? You mentioning culture, but also mentioned subculture, really. And there's so many different genres of music. Carol Krum-Hansel, I know, did a study, and well, it's like our stars become aligned by around 11 years old in terms of the kinds of things that we like. So what is it about teens and music, and that music both being important and characterizing us, and then even from a memory standpoint, looking back, having such vivid memories from decades ago when you can't even remember, what you had for breakfast? What is it about those teen years and music and the teen brain and culture that makes it that way?
Oh, this is both adorable and bone-chilling. I read about this in Robert Sapolsky's book, Behave, the Biology of Our Best and Worst Behaviors. So a researcher brought teens and adults into the lab, fMRI scanner again, and they're laying there in the scanner. And Sapolsky, or no, it was a different researcher, is watching their brain activity as they were asked two questions. First question is, what do you think about yourself? What's your image about yourself? Second question, what do you think other people think about you? And Sapolsky reports that in adults, there was only partial overlap in response to those two questions. In teens, it was almost complete overlap. To a teenager, what you think others think of you is what you think of yourself, which is why teenagers are so easily led into doing risky behaviors, because if it increases their status in the social hierarchy, no price is too high to pay. They'll do really crazy stuff because nothing matters more than where they fit in their social world. Music can be really useful at helping to demonstrate for others. If you're an art music fan, if you like hip hop, if you like rock music, if you like the emo music, it's letting you show to others what pop stars you would like to be consistent with. There's a concept in psychology called self-congruity, and we tend to, especially when we're teens, we tend to like artists whose perspective, heard through their lyrics and through their fashion and how they carry themselves out there in the world, is congruous with who we'd like to be out there in the world. Now, the thing about getting older and sticking with that artist is really very sweet, because you can have a really terrible day at school. You break up with your sweetheart or you fight with your friend. It's terrible. You come home and you put a record on, and that singer takes care of you. That singer tells you, here's the attitude you need when you go back to school tomorrow. Here's what you need to say to her. Here's what you need to say to him. And what do we do when someone takes care of us when we hurt? We bond to them. Someone who heals us and makes us feel good when we're hurting, we bond to them. So music is so effective, that combination of lyrics and melody is so effective at tapping into our feelings and putting words to our feelings, which teens tend to be a little bit shy about. They don't have that vocabulary yet. So we can bond very tightly to artists in our teens. Now, people who are deeply involved in music, professional musicians or record makers, and avid fans will explore music throughout pretty much every decade of their life. They'll keep looking for those same treats in different styles of music. But a great many people discover the music that they love in their teenage and college years, and they're good with that. They stick with it. That's because music is just not an especially important stimulus in their world. Food or fashion or sports or movies or books might be more important to them.
And where does music rank in sort of people's favorite things? Those surveys have been done, right, Susan?
Yeah.
Where does music rank relative to pizza or sex, that ice cream, that list, right? I
Yeah,
think music's pretty high up there, if I remember some of the data, correct?
right. So Peter Renfro and Samuel Gosling, their work in 2003 still stands as being really, really important. And they just measured thousands of people, but they were all college students. And they asked that question, can you compare these different things and rank order them in terms of importance? And the things were music, your hobbies, your bedrooms, how you decorate your bedroom. They were asking about self-expression and to what extent you use music to let the other kids know this is who you are. And they did find that music ranked really high. They also discovered something that I was so into when it came out, and now I'm starting to be skeptical of it. I need to read more about it, but they did some work that suggested that you can predict what style of music we'll like based on how we respond to personality measures. The big five, the ocean personality measures, the I-Sync personality test, cognitive profiles, that can predict what style of music we like. I'm a little skeptical because personality is so context driven. And you might have some personality traits that you exhibit in some situations and other ones that you exhibit in others. I used to be an advocate of personality studies, and now I'm pulling back from that a little bit until better data comes along.
Yeah, well, the subtitle of the book is very provocative and really makes you want to pick it up and find out more about oneself. I think the ego development story that you spoke to, where music becomes a symbol of one's or component of one's identity, whether it's hair or fashion or those sorts of things, really identify who we are. So getting back to the subtitle, what is it that the music we love says about us? How does that work? And to what extent does it apply, or how much do we know at this point?
Yeah, I kind of screwed up on that subtitle. We all agreed on it. We worked closely with Norton, the publisher. We love our editor, Tom, and Agent Jim, and we all agreed on it. And it was a mistake because the subtitle is What the Music You Love Says About You. And so people will come up to me after talks and they'll say, here's what I love. What does it say about me? What I wanted you to do is you tell me what the music you love says about you. So instead of saying what, it should have said how. It should have said how the music you love reveals you, or something like that. You tell us, and I hoped with this book to give people, to give them a roadmap to exploring their own listener profile and find a way of describing to others, here's what I love and here's why I love it. For example, with my students, I can play them examples. All right, kids, today we're talking about rhythm. I'm going to play you the groove that I love more than anything. And here's why I love it. This works for me. You're going to like something else. There are subtle differences there. You might like a groove that causes your body to go up and down, like a rock beat, side to side, like a Latin groove, front to back, like something kind of soulful, R&B maybe. We all have these preferences. Here's why I like a certain style of lyric writing. Here's why I like certain melody and harmony. My sweeping melodies just make me swoon. I love it so much. Fortunately for me, my co-author could not be more opposite in his musical taste. I like realism, he likes abstraction. And we did not plan it this way. I don't understand the music he likes at all. And he has no feeling for the music I like. He likes narrow melodies. He likes electronic music. It's the opposite of what I like. He likes those up and down rhythms. Oh, I like my front to back. I like some elasticity. That's the beautiful thing, is that each one of us has our own unique listener profile. And it's because we have a unique profile that music has such great diversity. No one's going to go into the recording studio and make a record that pleases everyone. You never will. You'll make a record that pleases some people for different reasons. This is why most of us, when you ask people, what kind of music do you like? They'll say, I have really eclectic taste. Of course you do. You have eclectic taste because some of your records were chosen because they match your sweet spot on one dimension, other records for a second dimension or a third dimension or a fourth. We should have a variety of taste in food, in fashion, and in our music.
One of the questions that always comes up with students and general audiences has to do with musicality. And in particular, feeling like, oh, gee, you know, I don't know how to play a musical instrument. I don't really understand music. I don't really know what you're talking about when you know, talk about octaves and fifths, and sort of having that kind of a reaction to it, while at the same time, in fact, all the members of a given musical culture have a remarkable fund of knowledge of music, its sound, its even its grammar for that particular culture. Can you say a little bit about how that relates to, how do you communicate with people who are not musicians and don't know the vocabulary, to help them understand that, just like Chomsky talked about with universal grammar, that they acquired this implicit knowledge of music subconsciously, automatically, passively, no explicit instruction, much in the way we learn the grammar of speech. Tell all of us who are in the audience and not necessarily musicians, how it works, that they're actually how can you convince them, Susan, that they are musical?
Yes.
And they have knowledge there, you know, that's there, that they're not giving themselves credit for.
Good. It took me years to embrace my musicality. I needed a lot of evidence before I recognized it. But I'll tell you, 97 was the year I was producing an artist named Jeff Black, and the rhythm section was the band Wilco. Some of you may know. It was Wilco minus the lead singer, Jeff Tweedy, and great session musician and producer, Greg Wells, on piano. It's great, great musicians. I am, as I said, a non-musician. I have no music theory at all. And got these guys together in the studio, and we had no time for pre-production because Wilco only had 2 weeks between 2-week break on their tour. So I had to say to all these guys, you guys, I can never go to your instrument and show you what inversion I want you to play. I can never pick up your instrument and show you, demonstrate for you how I want this to sound. The only thing I can do is tell you what I, as the listener, want to experience. I'll tell you, I'm always going to be good about this. I'll tell you when you're going in a direction that I think is wrong for the song, or when you're on the right track. But I will use terms that describe what I, the listener, would like to feel, and I'm standing in for what I hope is an awful lot of listeners who might like this record. And they were silent for a second, and the late, great Jay Bennett said, as long as you don't use the word consciousness. I promise you, I will never say consciousness. No, and it worked. It worked. Many years ago, before that, I worked as an assistant with the great producer Gus Dudgeon, who did all those Elton John records through the bulk of Elton's career. The heyday of his career lasted decades, and it was Gus Dudgeon who was manning the helm. Gus Dudgeon was a non-musician as well, and I asked him about that. He was just lit his pipe, and he's sucking on his pipe, and I said, how were you able to do that, Gus? How are you able to produce these musicians without being a musician? And he gestured with his pipe, and he says, well, I don't need to be a musician, do I? The musicians are out there. I need to be the non-musician in the room. In time, I realized that what music is a relationship between those who are on output and make these musical gestures and those who are on input and receive it. Food, if it's just sitting on a plate, is not food. Food doesn't become food till you eat it. And music doesn't become music until you listen to it. The consumatory phase, the listening to music, is where music actually comes alive. So we listeners have plenty to say about what music is and how it works.
So we're all musical.
Yes, we should be. I mean, there's a few exceptions out there, but I think the majority of us, as some African cultures, Daniel Levitin taught me this, as they say, if you can talk, you can sing, and if you can walk, you can dance. That's just what they believe. So there's no reason why we can't. Little children do.
I think we're entering Act 3 here, Susan. So we have lots of questions from a rather large audience, as I understand, Vicky. Fire away.
Will do. But first of all, I want to thank you both for this fascinating conversation. I think everybody learned so much from both of you, and I have to say your students are very fortunate because you're both incredibly wonderful teachers, inspiring. So thank you. We have some very interesting questions. The first one, I think this is so interesting. From Norm, are we not all naturally wired for music at birth after 9 months of listening to the rhythm and beat of our mother's hearts?
Mark, do you want to take this one? I can speak to it as well, but you may have more
Fascinating.
learning in this area.
So the auditory system develops about halfway through pregnancy. What that experience might be, since really the experience, although ear is used as a metaphor, actually it really is at the level of the cerebral cortex that music takes shape in the way that we're talking about it right now. So also the sounds that you hear in the womb, they actually exist online. You can listen to them. It's surprisingly noisy. It's not just the heartbeat, it's a lot of bowel sounds actually. And it's very much low frequency sounds, like when you're in your car and you turn the treble all the way down and turn the bass all the way up, which is called low pass filtering in the world of acoustics and audio engineering. You really don't have that experience, but the system is primed. The way I like to think of it is the system is already developed and primed. And I think the way I wrote it in one review is it's primed to pick up on regularities in the temporal features of music, which have to do with rhythm, and with the spectral features of music, which have to do with melody and harmony. And whatever culture you are born into has its own set of regularities. That might be another universal with music, is that all musics have some structure that the human mind and pattern recognition apparatus can make use of. So yes, we're there, but it's not refined. And the teen question, right? The brain isn't fully developed. This risk behavior you talked about, Susan, right, is somewhat related to brain development and immaturity, right?
Right. I'm starting to be doubtful about this pre-wiring sort of concept because I'm learning more about it. I'm reading or just finished The Brain from Inside Out by the great neuroscientist Ogi Ogas. And he talks about how a brain is self-organizing, these neural assemblies. And as you just described, Mark, what you're exposed to is causing your little brain to go, okay, well, this is important in my world. I need this. And it's pruning a lot of neural connections that it says, well, this is never going to come up again, and growing stronger connections for the things that you encounter a lot. This is why my friend, the musician Tommy Jordan, says, anything you do a lot, you get good at. So be careful what you do a lot. That's what your brain's doing.
Thank you both. Ellen mentions an organization called Music Men's Minds that is for people who have brain illnesses. And I wonder if you could comment about music and memory. And two examples that come to mind are Glenn Campbell in the film Glenn Campbell, I'll Be Me, where he can not even put together a sentence, but he can sing all his lyrics. And Tony Bennett, who gave a performance with Lady Gaga and the next day did not remember doing it.
Oh, breaks your heart. What great musicians they are. I love them both. So we talk about music listening and being a whole brain workout. Music performance is an even bigger whole brain workout. So when you're performing music like Glenn Campbell or Tony Bennett, your motor cortex is going, cerebellum is going, your auditory cortex is going, regions that process lyrics, regions that process melody, your cognition is going because you're infusing your performances with meaning, with emotional meaning. So that brain is lightened up. And that makes the signal, the musical signal that is encoded by memory circuits, more robust because it has more areas of the brain in which to reference when it is encoding a memory. If you forget the lyrics, the melody can remind you, and the rhyme scheme, of course. If you forget the melody, the lyrics can prompt it. The rhythm can trigger enough of a trickle of memory that yeah, this is a strong swing beat. This is how high the moon. That's so much more robust of a signal, featuring many different components of the brain compared to just speech alone and memories for just events that have happened in our life. And one other important factor, music tends to be pretty emotional. So the emotional component as well can help assist the encoding of memory.
Thank you, Mark. Did you want to add to that?
Well, first of all, Music Men's Minds is this wonderful organization in Los Angeles whereby individuals with age-related neurological diseases come together to perform for others in remarkable ways that you a priori might think they might not be able to do. And the combination of the socialization and the joy in the face of progressive disease is uplifting to see this sort of gathering and effort and joy in people who you would think wouldn't be capable of it, given what they have to bear in terms of their day-to-day lives. It's a beautiful, beautiful thing. I think when we talk about memory we have to remember there are many different types of memory. And they can be divided along different conceptual frameworks. One of the ones with music that certainly is at play with Music Men's Minds performers is the notion of procedural memory, or what some people call muscle memory. Mm-hmm. And that particular type of memory is quite resilient to all sorts of brain damage and also to the ravaging effects of aging and neurodegenerative disease. So procedural memory, the ability to play the piano despite not being able to remember what town you're in at the moment, is often preserved and can be utilized to improve quality of life in people like the Music Men's Minds patients. For all patients around the country, I think the NIH is certainly interested in getting that sort of a research network going where we can really help individuals' quality of life through music. And this is an example. There's another factor with memory, which has to do with when you actually acquired the memory, which is usually couched as short-term versus long-term memory. So it may be hard to remember what happened seconds or minutes ago, but if you're asked to remember something that you actually learned when you were a teenager or in your 20s, you'll find that patients with severe amnesia, most of whom these days are Alzheimer's patients, they actually have these good memories. And as friends of SEM will know from the special movie on the animated film Coco, it actually revolves around, in terms of its crescendo and denouement, about how music jogs memory and brings to life someone who really is severely impaired. So those two aspects of memory, long-term memory, procedural memory, are rather resilient and are preserved in the face of neurological disease. And look, we have music, like Susan said, it involves so many different areas of the brain, and it taps into areas that aren't ravaged by the disease. What a wonderful thing to bring into someone's life to improve their quality of life.
So true. You know, we did an open mind with a group. It's an orchestra called the Me Too Orchestra. And all the musicians have a diagnosed mental illness, and many talk about, and the conductor actually had gone to Juilliard and had a wonderful career until he had an episode from bipolar disorder. But this orchestra has saved many lives and really brilliant musicians. So, and going back to Coco, Mark was our discussant for that program, which was really fabulous. And that was the theme of that movie, was the bringing back memories. Enough of my comments. We have a comment here about a question here about sound engineering, Susan. And what role do you think that AI is going to play in future sound engineering?
I don't know. I don't know. People have asked me, you know, that AI is now composing music, and people have asked me, is that a good thing or bad thing? What do I think about it? And honestly, you know, music is judged by how or if it functions for people. If it functions for a listener as music, then it is music. If something functions as food, then it is food. It might not be the best food, but if it's functioning to nourish you, do the job of food, it's food. And the same thing with AI music. Will AI take over engineering? Boy, there's a lot of people who'd love to sell you software. But I just did a session on Friday. I was in Spain and I hadn't done a session in a long, long time, but they asked me to do one as a workshop. And when you're engineering and producing a session, you're taking your listener profile and you're bringing it into the room, and you're manipulating sound sources and microphone placement and EQ and compression. And in your brain, you're listening to the active signal that's going on right now, what's coming out of the loudspeakers, and your mental image of what you'd like to be hearing. And you're moving that thing around, and it's no, 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 until you move that microphone just the right way or dial in that compressor just the right way. And then you say yes. So what is that? It just means that in your brain, your sonic signature has developed to regard this kick drum sound as better than that kick drum sound. We, making records in the studio, become really good at honing our listener profile to such an extent that we can make money with it at some point. Now, AI can be programmed to do that, but we'll find out. I don't like the sound of it.
A couple of questions here about hip hop, which for many of us who were born of a certain era is kind of new music. And one question specific, where is the dopamine of hip hop?
Oh, there's lots. So, I was just doing rhythm. Rhythm was today's lesson in one of the classes that I taught, and we went back to the 1940s and played swing, and that's how people danced. And there's swing, and there's Ella doing How High the Moon, and then I played a shuffle. Actually, Chuck Berry's Johnny Be Good is a shuffle. I played a rumba, Ahmad Jamal, Poinciana. We listened to that, and I played disco and played funk, and James Brown with the funky drummer, and then it happened, the 80s, that hip hop beat became the beat, and it soon took over the pop charts. It's had a long run.
50 years.
Yeah, our rhythms change the way we dance and flirt on the dance floor in the club, and the way we dance and flirt influences our rhythms. So young record producers who work in hip hop have been reinventing rhythm in a brilliant way for a long time. They're deconstructing it. The producer Timbaland and another one called Just Blaze, they're deconstructing rhythm to see how far you can pull it apart, still have it function as rhythm. But we have finally turned a corner, and rhythm's days, we may be waving goodbye to it. Now we are in the era of sound design. And some modern records that I played for the students have no drums at all. Keyboard parts are doing the rhythm. The vocal is doing the rhythm, or the bass is doing the rhythm. The young people today are experimenting with how they can express rhythm without using any drums or any percussive instruments. It's always going to evolve, and it's kind of thrilling. Doesn't mean that the older generation is going to like it, but that's okay. We've got our music. We'll just stick with what we know.
Sorry. Mark, did you want to add anything on that one?
I was just thinking that there's a difference between recognizing and liking a particular genre and releasing dopamine.
Mm.
So in the way that Susan talks about the seven stars and their alignment, when they are properly aligned, they then lead to the release of dopamine. So it really doesn't matter that one person prefers hip hop, or Susan will take the Stones and I'll take the Beatles. What matters is that those artists align our stars for us. And in doing so, that leads to release of dopamine within these phylogenetically ancient structures of the brain that have to do with pleasure. So the connection between the dopamine and the genre is solid, but the genre itself can vary according to what your listener profile is. I think this is an important part of the listener profile, is it gets you to a point where you can actually get some dopamine release when your profile aligns with the stimulus.
We played Funky Cold Medina. I played it as an example of a hip hop beat. A Funky Cold Medina that came out in '89. And boy, it set the bar for hip hop records in that era. Not my favorite music, but prior to that, I played Donna Summers on the radio. I love disco. I love it for the bass. For me, dopamine flying all over the place listening to that. Not so much for Funky Cold Medina. It just doesn't line up with my profile.
Thank you both. We're almost out of time, but we just a couple more questions here. One from Jeanette about music therapy. She says, music therapy has been amazing for my son with autism. Are there any research, books, studies you might recommend? And just maybe comment on music therapy in general for people with illnesses of the brain, physical illnesses.
I don't know of any books I can recommend, but I'm sure they're out there. There's a lot of books, of course, that are written for experts in the field, but written for the lay audience, I don't know if there's much out there. I can point you to a wonderful young woman named Eve Marie Quintin, Quintin. She's at McGill University, and she's coming up very quickly as one of the world's experts in music and the intersection of music and children on the autism spectrum. So you could write to Eve Marie Quintin at McGill University and ask her what she knows. As they say sometimes, that music therapy is not an academic discipline so much as it is a practice. We train therapists to go out into the field. It's not unified yet as a discipline because people are so diverse and the problems that it approaches are so diverse that you can't really say, well, this is how you do it for everybody, because it's all so different.
So there is a book, Foundations of Music Psychology, which is it's somewhat more of a technical book, but nonetheless, we wrote a chapter together with Miriam Lenz on the amusias and disorders of musicality. And Quentin's, I'm probably mispronouncing it, Susan, but Quentin's review of autism and music in that chapter would be an excellent resource for the questioner. So it's Foundations of Music Psychology is the book. It's fairly recent in the past few years. And there's a chapter on amusias with Quentin as the lead author. What's the correct pronunciation, Susan?
He pronounces it Quintin.
Okay, Quentin is the in English, it looks like Quentin.
Yeah.
And I would highly recommend that as a reference for autism and music.
Thank you both. We're going to end on this comment from Saul. It says, this is not a question, but a compliment to Susan. The album you produced, Stunt, was absolutely brilliant in its production. Thank you for creating that reality for us to dwell in and enjoy. And I'm going to add, thank you for creating the reality of today's program, both you and Mark. It really has been an inspiring, stimulating, and fascinating discussion. So thank you really both for sharing your knowledge, your expertise with all of us who tuned in today. And I want to thank everybody who tuned in today's program. Thank you for the privilege of your time. We look forward to seeing you. Our next Open Mind is very soon on March 16th with Dr. Chantal Prat. It's the neuroscience of you, how every brain is different and how to understand yours. So thank you. Stay well, stay safe. And we look forward to seeing you at future Open Mind programs. Good night.
Thank you, Vicki. Thank you,
Thank
Wendy.
you.
Thank you, Mark.
Thanks,
Thank
guys, for
you.
coming. Thank you,
Thank
audience.
you.